So what is the game about? Well, Guacamelee is an old school 2D beat 'em up. It's themed as Mexican Day of the Dead, and you basically go about fighting a dead supervillain. So you play as one who's a luchador, and he's basically got access to a magical mask which gives him super luchador powers. With these, he's basically able to fight the enemies. These enemies range from large skeletons, giant knights, bat creatures, all kinds of odd things from Mexican legend, I assume. One also has the ability to jump between the living and the dead worlds through portals. Later on, you also gain the ability to do this at will. So on to the story. Basically, the story is you chasing a villain who was the good guy until he got ill, and now he wants the sacred guacamole. Yes, you did hear that correctly. In order to fix himself, he thinks it's actually going to make him better. The problem is, he wants these three relics which are going to destroy the multiverse, the Mexican multiverse in this case. So you've got various different versions of the multiverse. The villain actually comes from a version where your character actually didn't defeat the villain and died, and he had to basically step in and do the job for you. So basically, in doing this, he wore the mask which wasn't meant for him, and it's actually made him ill and it's killing him. So now he basically wants this special guacamole which was made by the god of time in order to save himself. So now we go on to the gameplay. The gameplay is your basic 2D mechanic platformer. So you're basically having a fighting game with platforming, special little puzzle rooms where you can get extra things such as power-ups. The fighting is pretty much button mashing. I mean, you've got various skills you can use. You get various power-up skills as well. These special moves have to be used. Certain creatures will have shields around them, and these shields basically match the colour of one of your special moves. So red will be your power uppercut, blue will be your forward power punch, yellow will be your headbutt, and green is effectively your belly slam. The game operates in a metroid-vania kind of way, where you have to go through the world, find statues, and these statues will grant you special moves. In true metroid-vania fashion, you then have to use these moves in order to go back to areas you've already visited and progress further, such as the power uppercut will allow you to break red blocks above your head, the punch will allow you to break blue blocks, the headbutt will allow you to break yellow blocks, and the slam will allow you to break the green blocks. Some areas need to be accessed by chaining these moves together, and it can become quite complicated pretty quickly when you have to chain a punch with a forward punch and then a headbutt and maybe a slam. On top of all these luchador moves, one also gains the ability to change into a chicken. In chicken mode, he literally has a second set of moves that you have to learn to get the chicken through various little puzzle mazes. These can give you some nice shortcuts, but some of them are incredibly complicated. And you also have to go around doing a metroid-vania for the chicken, where you find various moves which allow you to access various other places, purple blocks which can be wrecked with a peck, etc, etc. So it's basically a lot of metroid-vania backwards and forwards in, which then allows you access to other places, which then gives you new power-ups. If you like that kind of exploration, then this is definitely one of those games that will appeal to you. The map is quite large, and there are areas which you'll kind of scratch your head wondering how you're going to get to them at first. Then you get a new move and you think, I can probably use that move to get to this area now. Some of the areas are straightforward, some of them are pretty obvious, but you just don't have the move for it. And others are just, what the heck am I going to do to get to that? It's all kind of adding to the fun to it, but at the same time, it can be quite frustrating when you really do have to backtrack across the entire map. And as I say, the map can be quite large. Now, dotted around this map at various places, you'll find little towns which have living people in them. And if you switch to the Dead World version, we'll have like the dead versions of their family in them. Sometimes you'll have to communicate between the sides. So you'll say, oh, your dead uncle said this, or your dead father said that. It can lead you to get an extra rewards. Sometimes they'll tell you of things that were hidden by someone, but that person is now dead. You can then hop over to the Dead World, ask that person where they hid it. The Dead World people tend to be more liberal with their belongings, like, oh, well, I couldn't take it with me anyway, so yeah, you might as well have it, kind of thing. And it's all just quite funny. It's quite interesting that they've made the two perspectives, where people are coveting stuff when they're living, and then when they're dead, they kind of realise just how absolutely pointless it was. This is kind of stuff that just adds to the game's atmosphere, and it's kind of quite cute. But at the same time, the puzzles can get quite frustrating when you're hopping back and forwards between worlds. Dotted through all of this is the main aim for the game, which are bosses that you need to fight. Each of the bosses represents one of the villain's henchmen. They're trying to get these statues before you do, or these relics. A lot of the time you'll face them as you get the relic, or you might face them after, or you might have to fight to get the relic back. The bosses are actually quite good fun. One of them loves to dance and put on a show with chickens, which is kind of quite bizarre, and the chickens actually speak to him. Another one is a giant cactus, and one of the other ones is a weird witch. So these are quite comical bosses, and the way you fight them is also quite comical. But at the end, they all tend to change into some giant monster version of themselves. A bit like watching one of those Power Rangers shows where at the end, the villain suddenly brings out a giant robot or a giant power form, and you're thinking, well, why didn't you just use that at the beginning? But it is quite good fun. And when it's not too hard, and the battles can get quite frustrating at times due to the mechanics you need to use, but when they don't, when it gets to that sweet spot, it can just be quite good fun to fight them. So that brings me to my likes and dislikes of the game. What did I like about it? Well, I love the atmosphere of the game, I love the theme, I love the Mexican Day of the Dead style, and the graphics are all wonderful. I love the way the game controls. I mean, it can be quite tight at times, but once you get the skills down, it's pretty good. And I also love the fact that when you speak to the townspeople, a lot of the humour is kind of pretty funny. And if you've ever played the first game, then a lot of the humour is based towards that. And they'll say they remember you from this or remember you from that. It's a bit weird if you haven't played the first game because you sometimes won't know what they're talking about. But if you have, then the humour kind of carries over and you'll kind of find yourself chuckling at certain things that they say. It also has a very nice hop in and hop out mechanic where you can just play certain bits of it. What it does is every time you get to a little shrine, it'll save your progress. And I mean, it'll literally save your progress. So if you're in chicken form, it'll save you in chicken form. If you're in luchador form, it'll save you in luchador form. It saves literally up to that point. So you can just hop in and hop out, spend 10 minutes playing, find a shrine, rush over that shrine, save, and then you can come back like 4 hours later and continue where you left off. So that part of it I really like because it means there's no hurry to like finish the game, and you don't have to feel pressured at each point because the shrines are dotted all over the place and they're pretty easy to get to. Now on to what I didn't like. What I didn't like was the difficulty. That seemed to ramp up incredibly quickly. A lot of the rooms you find that you won't be able to finish because you don't have the right moves. But there's no indication that you don't have the right moves. So you might spend 10 minutes trying the room before you suddenly realise that, that jump is literally 2 pixels further than I can currently get with the moves I have. And that can be really frustrating, especially as it's not clear what moves you'll need for certain rooms until you've actually got them. For instance, there were a few rooms where I didn't realise you had to change into chicken form to actually finish them. And the reason I didn't know that was because they have little symbols in them which Juan can actually use to transport himself around the room. But the problem is that if you try to use those symbols, you're not actually going to finish a room. And it's kind of like really misleading and it gets really frustrating. So I didn't like that aspect. I didn't like the backtracking. There was just way too much of it. I seem to remember in the first game there was a lot less backtracking. There may not have been, but it did feel like a lot less in the first game. And the second one, you feel like you spend most of your time backtracking. A lot of the stuff that you want to get, like the power-ups in order to be able to beat the bosses, is just kind of miles back and you need a move to do it, and then you need to go back and you need to go forwards and you need to go left, right, you know. It's just a lot of backtracking, and that is going to put a lot of people off, I think. Also the humour. If you haven't played the first game, the humour, some of it can be quite hit and miss because you won't understand the jokes. Other parts of the humour, they'll just translate to everybody. But that's another aspect that I didn't quite like. I mean, they spent too much time in the past, effectively, with those jokes. So you really had to have known the first game in order to get them. And finally, another thing which I think is a bit of a negative for it, if you have played the first game, you're going to find that the second game is way too similar to the first one. I mean, I picked up the moves, and even when I was running about getting the new moves, they were basically the same moves I had in the first game. I was just re-getting them. And the more and more moves I got, the more and more I realised that they were just giving me the same moves I already had. They should have just started me with them and moved on from there, I think. But then if you haven't played the first game, I can understand that they want the mechanic in there where you get the moves, you learn the moves, and you play the moves. But for veteran players who've played the first game, you're basically just reacquiring what you already had, and that can be quite frustrating later on when you know what moves you need to do certain things, and then you have to hunt throughout the entire game to try and find that move. So finally, should you buy it? Well, if you haven't played the first game, I would say this is quite a good pickup. The price is quite cheap, and I actually got it on sale on the Xbox store, so you can like pick it up for, I picked it up for about 13, I think, with discount. So at that price, it's definitely worth it. It's an excellent game. The quality is really good. The replayability, not so much, but it's a huge game anyway, and it's in the metroid-vania style, so you're going to spend a lot of time rushing about trying to perfect everything. So in that sense, it's quite goodbye. If you've played the first one, I'd say you're not getting anything new, so you'd kind of have to weigh in whether or not you really like the first one, but then I'd wait for the price to be below 10, to be honest to you. If you've played the first one, you're not getting anything new. I mean, it is basically the same game. So there you have it. That's my review of Guacamelee 2. I hope you liked it. If you did, hit the like button, hit the bell if you want to hear more from me, and that's all.